Welcome to a Legalbytes presentation of the Karen Read murder trial. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel we make sense of the law one bite at a time. If you want more on the background of the Karen Read case, check out our video on it linked in the description below. But otherwise, you be the jury. Did Karen Read murder her Boston PD boyfriend John O'Keefe, or is she being framed by local police who Read says are actually responsible for O'Keefe's death? Tell us what you think. But in the process, the one rule is don't be a dingus. Remember, everyone comes from their own perspective and opinion, and everyone comes to conclusions at their own pace. Agree or disagree, but always respectfully. Okay, let's get into it. All right, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful live stream about the Boston Tea Party case, as I like to call it, after all the tea that has been spilling out about Canton PD and Massachusetts State Police and everything else. It's been quite a wild trial. For the first time ever, I have Brandy Churchwell here from the 13th Juror Podcast. Welcome, Brandy. So happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So if you guys aren't already familiar with Brandy, like I said, so she runs a YouTube channel, 13th Juror Podcast, a lot of true crime stuff. You get into a lot of like charts and diagrams and stuff that's like really detailed. I love it. It's like, it's so much more in depth than sometimes I have the ability to do, getting into like all of those nitty gritty details. And I love it. I love it. So if you guys have not watched any of her stuff, definitely head over there. She's linked in the title, linked in the description. Go over there, watch her stuff, like all the stuff, subscribe and everything, all the great YouTube-y stuff. So I wanted to have this conversation. We were just talking a little bit, behind the scenes, just briefly, but I wanted to have this conversation because, I've been live streaming the trial. You've been live streaming the trial and going into it. And I had a little bit of an understanding going into it. I think you did too. You had some prep work that you did as well. And I wanted to have a conversation about like, what were the impressions that we had that maybe other people had for this trial going into it, for the prosecution's case in chief? What did they do? What did they end up doing? What were we expecting that we didn't maybe get from this case in chief? And just kind of have a conversation. I know that folks have some questions that they asked, on YouTube in the community tab, as well as on Twitter and elsewhere. So we'll try to get in some questions as well. If you guys have questions in the chat, also just tag me and or put a big red question mark or a few Q's in there so that I can see it, and then hopefully I'll be able to save it, and we'll ask some questions and we'll go up with that. So yeah. So what are your thoughts? What were your thoughts going into this case, before day one, before opening statements? Like, just kind of walk me through a little bit of your background and how you heard about it, how you heard about it and everything.
Well, I first heard about it because some of my members were sending it to me and saying, this is crazy. You've got to check this out. And I had started looking into it and I was like, oh, it sounds like she just, probably hit him and is trying to get out of it. And, everybody's always, it was somebody else. It was some other guy. And so I kind of went into it like, and then I started digging a little bit and I was like, wait a minute, like some of these statements in the court papers aren't adding up and the times are different. And I do chart everything out like with times because I'm like a data nerd. I want to see all the data together and then put it together and see what story it tells, because people can tell you whatever, but data tells you something totally different sometimes. So when I started putting everything together, then I was like, what's happening here? And then I started kind of looking into it a little bit. And then I saw, one of the panels that was talking about it, and they were like screaming at each other. And I was like, this is so interesting that two people believe so passionately and fully in, one believes in her guilt so passionately and fully, and one believes in her innocence so passionately and fully. So I was like, that's really interesting to me. That's not something you see often on trials. And I started digging in. And then the more I dug in, the more I was like, okay, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't line up. This is a different story than this, but it's, these are all in court documents. And so everything started. Normally when I can start going through the documents, that's what starts answering my questions. And all that did was bring more questions. So then by that time I was hooked. The messiness of it kind of hooked me in.
Yeah, for sure. I had kind of a similar sort of experience. I had people that were emailing me, that were messaging me, about the Karen Reed case. Like you've got to look into this case. It's so interesting. There's so many questions about it. Like some people saying she's being framed, other people saying no, she's definitely guilty. And of course, like you, the more I kind of looked into the discourse around it, and just how passionate people were, I was like, this is very interesting. This is very, very interesting. And the allegations themselves, like you said, I was very skeptical of the defense at first. I'm like, of course, every criminal defendant says like, it wasn't me, it was someone else. I'm a patsy. I'm, like to some extent, right?
Yeah.
There's always some kind of, there's problems in the investigation. The cops didn't do what they were supposed to do. Sometimes there's merit to that, but sometimes there's not. And there have been some cases where that was like the main argument by the defendant that I remember covering a case for, and that just was absolutely not true at all. I'm like, I'm sorry, you're guilty. You're
right.
guilty.
And I think that's a go-to for a lot of them. And we watch them as they're trying to like poke holes because of these things and create doubt. And so I'm used to seeing that in trials that I'm watching or covering. But this was the first one where it wasn't just poking holes. It was like showing huge crater size holes in the story and in the investigation. And so it very crazy.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, is that like, I talk a lot about like just the opening statements from the very beginning, the opening statements are just a set of promises that the two sides are making to the jury. Like, this is what you are going to see. You're going to see everything is laid out the way that we say it is. And obviously one of them is going to end up being wrong or I guess more correct than the other. There's not necessarily always a clear winner in a case. And so then that, that's why there's a burden on one side as opposed to the other and whatnot. But I remember, just from the very beginning, when David Yannetti started off with Karen Reed was framed, I was like, holy crap. Like that is a very, very strong stance. Like, it's like the meme, it's a bold move, Cotton.
Yeah.
Hope it works out.
Yeah.
But so far, the facts have fallen in the prosecution's case in chief in favor of the defense. And that was the thing that was more surprising to me, was right off the bat, the momentum shifted in the defense's favor.
Yeah. And I don't feel like there was ever a shift back. I feel like in the beginning it felt like, and I even remember, the whole point of my channel is, we call it, we're the 13th jurors. So I'm not an attorney. I don't have, I have very minimal legal insight, and that's only very, very basic from what I have watched and seen. I have no legal background. So we watch it as jurors and try to weigh the evidence as jurors would without the legal expertise that somebody like you would have. So we watch it and we weigh it. And so, but I like to hear that legal aspect. So when I finish, I'll bounce around to different channels and, hear attorney perspectives on it. And I was thinking, when the first week or so, especially, I was thinking like, this is like, feels like that just the defense is just like coming out like bam, and it's not even their case. And so I started kind of looking around and everybody else was saying the same thing. I was like, okay, so I'm not just crazy. I'm not just seeing this.
Yeah.
And it felt like with the openings, especially, that's kind of, I think about it like this. So many people came to me, and when they started kind of getting into this case, because I started, doing my deep dive on it last year, and people were coming to me and they're like, this is really complicated. Like, where do I go for you to like break it down, like Cliff's Notes, to make it understandable and digestible? And that's with all of the whole wide internets available to them, and they still can't grasp it and don't know where to start. So think about the jurors coming in and having no background, no whole wide internets that they can look at about this. And they're having to rely on just the opening statements to give them an idea of the storyline of what to look for. And Lally's was so all over the place. And it was just basically, he mentioned, however, when I mentioned it in the podcast, I had averaged it out. I think it was like he mentioned a new name every 30 seconds for 8 minutes straight. you can't follow along with that.
Too much detail.
And not enough of what actually happened. And then the one thing that we picked up on that he did, like that didn't get lost in the sea of names, is that he says that Karen Reed hit him at 12:45. That was the thing that stood out to me the most, because it was, I'm like, okay, this is the one thing he gave us to look for. And now here we are, his lead detective, and is saying that she was home by 12:34 because there's missing ring video. And then the other guy says that she connected to the Wi-Fi at 12:36. So the one piece of information that he gave us in the openings to watch for was debunked by the lead detective. And that to me is a huge problem.
Yeah. That is a huge problem. And I completely agree. I mean, and so much of my trial coverage actually just kind of talks about like almost like just psychology of like what people can focus on and what they can't. There's also the legal aspect of like, this is proper, this is not proper, this is what this objection was, this is we're in this part of the case in chief, or things like that, like things to look for on cross-examination. Sometimes it'll be like that, but sometimes it really is. And this is one of the reasons why I love your podcast, is because in your channel and everything, is because the jury is made up of 12 people who typically are not lawyers. Every once in a while, a lawyer makes it onto the jury, but the likelihood of a lawyer making it onto the jury panel is very, very, very slim. It's like, generally speaking, somebody messed up.
Yeah.
So it's like, so impressions from lawyers is, I guess helpful because we can explain the process and all that kind of stuff. But it's also very helpful to have the reaction of people who are not lawyers, because that's likely to track along with people who don't have all that much experience with the legal system, who don't have, they don't spend a lot of time thinking about, trial process and strategy and all kinds of legal arguments to make. These are people who are your average person who just happen to be called in to make a decision on this particular case. And so, to your point about opening statements, that was, for me also, it was very frustrating, because I remember going into it being really excited, feeling like, okay, this is going to be this serious case and this serious case. And like, they're going to put on their best evidence. Very excited to see, like, essentially like two titans fighting. Like, that's kind of what I was hoping for going into it, because I remember when I was doing my own primer video on this, I did light research. I didn't do a full deep dive because I didn't have the time for it. And I knew it was very complex. And I knew the deeper I went into it, it would just be like, Alice going down the rabbit hole. And I wasn't sure if I would come out in time to start the trial.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I'll do enough to get a basic understanding and like go into it like relatively well-informed, generally speaking. I made a couple mistakes on one or two mistakes on my primer video. I definitely said that he was found on a snow plow, but I meant like plowed snow or something. I don't know. Anyway, it was a bit of a mistake. And I actually probably should go back and look back at it and be like, things have changed.
Yeah.
But anyway, but like, after I had done that, I was like, okay, well, there's this argument and there's this argument. There is, the fact that he was found with the tail pieces and the glass and all that kind of stuff around him. And how do you explain that? And like, okay, well, then there's also the fact that the glass, like, was there even surveillance footage of him walking out with glass? And all kinds of other questions, and like the snow levels and things like that. That I just, going into it, I was really, really hoping that this would be the best that either side would bring. And unfortunately, starting from the opening statements, that became pretty clear to me early on that the prosecution seemed like, I don't know, I can't explain it. It's either the prosecution on this side doesn't believe in their case, or they didn't send their best, or Lally is just already exhausted from the pretrial litigation or something. But it felt like they were either underprepared or just didn't know how to put on a trial. And given Lally's apparent experience, like, he's done a lot of trials from what I've heard, and to include murder trials, you would think that he would have honed his craft by now. And so it was like drinking from a fire hose with all those details, right? The details, you get lost in it. Like, all of that just tends to like go right over your head. If you don't have, like, I refer to it as, and I think, did you mention you have ADHD?
Yes.
Before? At some point? Same.
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, when it comes to details, like, I feel like I need to have like like a filing mechanism in order for me to remember details, because
Mhm.
otherwise, and even then, maybe I won't remember them, but
Yeah.
otherwise they completely go over my head. They just wash right over me.
Yeah.
And so when somebody just throws out information, data points, facts, you know,
Mhm.
things like that, without first giving like the four corners of like where these things fit in, it is impossible for me to remember any of that. And
Yeah.
I just, looking back, the thing that I remember most about his opening statement is just like this like wave of information that
Yeah.
just went completely over my head.
Yeah.
So that was, yeah, that was definitely the first thing for me as well, that was like, there might be a problem here for the prosecution.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I still didn't anticipate that we would end up getting what we ended up getting
Yeah.
in this case so far.
Yeah. I'm the same. I totally get what you mean about, because people ask me like, oh, how do you keep all those details straight? I can't do it when people are telling me. So even with the, watching the trials, I take notes as like I have a Google Doc and I take notes as we're watching, but I have to, then I use Otter and I download the video and it makes it into the transcripts, and I have to go back through and read the transcripts and then fill in things on my notes. And I do the charts because I can't remember the information and the data. And if you're speaking it to me, there are things that I will pick up on, but most of it I will miss because the ADHD brain, it's just, you're constantly changing channels in your brain.
Yeah.
And so I have to go and I have to organize it. So that's why I do these charts, because it's the same way that I did everything in school, because it's the only way I can organize information because of the ADHD, because it's so severe. So I have to organize all of the information and put everything together in a chart and then break that into groups so that I can digest it easier. So I take this time frame and I say, okay, this is what happened. This is what we know happened while she was in front of the house, or this is what, and I have to break it into sections. It's the only way that I can do it because there's so much information. So when you have somebody who, is sitting on a jury and they're listening to detail after detail after detail and name, and then the story as he's telling it, he's bouncing back and forth so much. When I went back to try to make sense of his, and now I watched it live. I watched it and, was even taking notes as much as I could. But when I went back and had to go through and did the actual transcript, his opening was so messy that I ended up having to copy and paste the entire transcript. And then I'm like, okay, he talked about this here, copy and paste, because he talked about it here, here, and here. So all the different sections that he talked about, all these things, put them all together in one and then try to digest it. It was so back and forth. There's no way, in my mind, there's no way that the jury could have heard that and had a clear idea of what they're looking for during the last, 2 months that we've been, or however long it feels, 84 years that we've been going through this.
Yes, exactly. That's the meme that I use.
Yes, and we have that soundbite on my channel too, and I'm always like, it's been 84 years.
Yeah, well,
but
let me play it.
It's been 84 years.
Yes. Oh, it's been, and somebody like my chat has started joking about how it's like we've passed 84. Like we're on year like 97-ish now, I think. So it's been crazy. But the defense, like you said, they came out swinging. Their very first statement in the openings was Karen Reed was framed. I was like, that's gutsy. But the jury knows what to look for. He was very specific about, this is our theory. This is what we're saying, happened. This is what to look for. So as they have gone through their cross-examinations and as they've gone through, the witness after witness, the ones who have, and I've seen that some people are like, well, why didn't they cross-examine this person or this person? I'm like, they didn't say anything that goes against their, theory. There was nothing that they could have gotten from them that, proves or disproves anything that they've said. But it was gutsy, but they know what to look for. And that has been, I feel like they've had the momentum going in their direction the entire time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's right from the get-go. They definitely have had the energy of being bold and being passionate, like right from the very beginning. And that has carried through. And the thing is, like, it's one thing to be bold, but it's another thing to be able to back it up with facts and information and evidence. And that's what enables someone to be that bold. Sometimes that can be a huge turnoff to a jury, but when you have the facts to back it up, it's like, how can you deny it? Right.
Yeah.
And the thing too about, being needing to see something as opposed to just hear it. I'm very much the same way. This is one of the reasons why I write notes the entire time that I am live streaming and commenting at the same time, because sometimes like the act of writing it itself and then also seeing it on the page, like I'm able to process better, like what is being said.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, when it comes to jurors, going back again to, these are average people, these are everyday people. How many people on the jury might have that kind of an issue too? Like every time someone gets up in front of a jury and puts on a trial, puts on any kind of an opening statement, a closing argument, all of those things need to be considered, which is like, if you don't have the attention of the jury, you will not get your message across to them. So if there are things that you are doing that is preventing them from paying attention, you need to fix that. Like, it's a very basic kind of like human psychology, human brain functioning kind of thing that, for me anyway, was taught very early on in advocacy courses in law school, which was like, don't wear anything that is ever going to be distracting. Don't do anything that's going to be distracting. Make sure that you have things well organized in a way that people can actually follow and track. So it's like, it's very basic kind of stuff that to me feels very strange that it wasn't actually followed in this particular case. And especially for such a high profile case, they knew people were going to be watching. They knew like the entire Boston area was going to be watching, for example. And then, people nationwide have also started to watch outside of the United States. Of course, we've got a lot of people from outside the US in my community for sure. I don't know about your community as well. Yeah. So like, there's a lot of eyes on this. You would think that they would have made sure to dot every I, cross every T, make sure that, things are the way that they should be. So I don't know where exactly things went wrong with that in particular. Because like I said, I was expecting so much more in terms of their preparation and organization and smoothness, really.
Yeah, I was too. And I think that I had so many questions and I kept thinking, okay, when we get here, all of these questions can finally be answered. Like, I need to know a clearer idea of how the injuries and the damage to the car line up, because that has never made sense to me. I needed to know why all of the statements had different times. I needed to know why some statements completely left people out of things and then some of them didn't. And there are some that say that, Chris and Julie Albert were there that night. And then there were some that say that they didn't. And then, Higgins isn't mentioned at all at Waterfall, but then all of a sudden he was at the house. And so I had all these questions and I was like, okay. And when you're trying to make a timeline, that's a nightmare because you don't have clear answers on what actually happened at what times and who was where. And, so there's all these holes. So I was thinking, okay, this will be their chance to fill in all the holes so that we can have the full picture of what happened and really understand it. And they have not done that. We know beyond a reasonable doubt that it was snowing and there was a band playing and, what, if anything, were they doing at the Waterfall? They were sitting at the high top tables and drinking, Tito's and Crystal Light and Jameson and Ginger and eating potato skins. Like, we know that beyond a reasonable doubt. Yes. But aside from that, they have not delivered on any of the, the fact finding I was hoping for and the clearing things up. And, it's hard to, and they had White Claws. Yes, they had there were White Claws involved,
That's right. There's no laws when you got White Claws. That's
exactly. Yeah. So it's, the things that even just the most simple things of, you have people that are, where the heck was Higgins parked? Like, the Jeep is, there are 3 people who were saying, I know for a fact he was parked in front of the mailbox in between Ryan Nagel and Ricky D'Antano and Heather Max, in between that truck and, Karen's SUV. And then you have the people that are in the truck saying, no, there was no Jeep in front of us. There was nothing.
We had a clear view of the SUV.
Yes. But so we're still in this situation where you have people who are all prosecution witnesses who are so sure about things, but they're all saying different things. And that to me is like, if you have the prosecutor and the lead investigator giving you different stories of what happened and they're supposed to be proving it beyond a reasonable doubt, how can a jury get beyond reasonable doubt when the two main people aren't even agreeing on, what happened or the time that it happened?
Yes.
So
yes.
it's
and this is even like, and I've also talked about this quite a bit, that in order for the prosecution to win, they need to win on everything. They need to convince the jury, this is the way that it happened. We're going to tell you step by step, this is how it happened. This is, this is the evidence that shows it. The defense is going to try to confuse you, but that doesn't make sense because of X, Y, Z. But this is the story. We are telling you from the beginning, we are not changing the story. Our theory as to how these things happened did not change from beginning to end. Otherwise, defense is 100% entitled to show where exactly they have moved the goal line on the jury. And so, they have that burden of proving that. The defense doesn't have any kind of a burden here. The defense is totally fine with all these different factual possibilities because they're like, look, they're supposed to explain it. They haven't explained it. What are all these questions that people still have about all of these things? And this is not even getting into like the framing argument, right?
Right.
It's kind of connected because, you have to believe that there was some aspect of framing Karen if you don't believe that all those taillights were there from the moment on that that part doesn't line up with like where you see photos of her taillight and there's some damage and then all of a sudden there's all the damage and supposedly all of those pieces were found at 34 Fairview Road as opposed to like scattered here and there from like, maybe John O'Keefe's house, there were a few pieces that were left. Maybe at Karen Reed's parents' house, there were a few pieces that had fallen there. Like that I could understand if that was like the prosecution's theory of like, it happened here and then pieces fell off because it was just driving around and weather and all this kind of stuff. But if they said, no, it happened here at 34 Fairview Road, all of those pieces shattered and fell there at that moment, and that's the story.
Yeah.
When it doesn't add up with this other stuff, you have more questions that adds more fuel to the framing argument, but you don't even need to go that far in order to find that the defense wins here.
Right. Yeah. And, to me, and we've talked about, on my channel before, as we've discussed this, we went into this talking about, okay, the defense's theory is that it had something to do with the third party culprit. So we've talked a little bit about that. And look, some of the things that they've said as far as trying to, argue those points during cross-examinations and things like that. Some of the things I think have fallen very flat. I feel like and this is just my opinion, like everybody has different opinions, but I feel like the picture of Chris and Julie Albert in front of his house, to me, that didn't feel like where they're, flipping off the camera or whatever and sending it to him. To me, that did not feel like this, nefarious thing, like, whatever. It seemed like whatever, being, acting like kids, whatever, that's fine. But to me, it did not feel like, motive for murder. If that to me felt about as murder motive-y as, hollering at Sullivan's little sister in Aruba, like to me, those were both kind of non-issues. So there are some things that I feel like have seemed like they were a reach on both sides, but on the defense side as well. But I kept thinking by the end of the Commonwealth's case that we would get to a point where, or not thinking that we would, but thinking that we needed to get to a point where that's not even a possibility anymore. That's the whole point of their case, is to show us this is all just noise and here's how we know what actually happened. And that didn't happen. And at some point during the trial, I think for me, everything shifted and it was like, okay, this is no longer even about a third party situation. This is about, they have not even proven that her car hit him. And for me, if it's not about, was it Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, or was it Karen Reed? It's not about that. The whole case is, was it Karen Reed? And if they haven't convinced me that that's the only reasonable explanation, then it doesn't matter as far as this case goes if it was Brian Albert or Brian Higgins, or if, it was some other random person, or, like wild coyotes, it doesn't matter. None of that matters, because they were not able to prove to me that any of those other situations are unreasonable, because this is the only reasonable explanation. And so for me, that's kind of where I'm at. It's not even about the third party stuff anymore.
Yeah.
It's about, there are so many holes and so many questions that were never answered, that I do not feel comfortable. If I were on the jury, I would not feel comfortable. Like, this is stable enough for me to send somebody away for the rest of her life. I couldn't do it.
That's the thing. That's the constitutional requirement, is that's why the burden is on the state, is because somebody is getting put away for potentially the rest of their life, or however much, time it is in any kind of a criminal case. It's somebody's life and liberty is being taken away from them as a result of the case. Let me get some super chats really quick, and then we'll also start getting some questions in here also. Veronica B, thanks so much for the super chat. Hi, Brandy. So good to see you here. We've seen how people were so mean to you on X. You did not deserve any of it, and we stand behind you 100%.
Thank you.
It's things like that can happen on social media. When you get into this kind of work, passions run high, things like that happen. But it's good to continue carrying on and giving the content that your community is asking for and what they deserve. So
yes. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Sable Marquette, thanks so much for gifting 5 with membership. Oh, there she is. There's Cindy. Cindy Bear, come here. Up on the chair.
Aww.
There she is. and then here comes Mabby, one of the cats. So now we're gonna have a full Legalbytes, treatment here with the pets. I'm sure Holmes, our tuxedo cat, will show up soon too. So Sable Marquette, thank you so much for gifting 5 Legalbytes memberships. So Nashe Jones, Tracy Eisen, Jennifer B, Lee 8910, Megan Rose, you've all been gifted memberships by Sable Marquette. So welcome back to Bike Club. So happy to have you here. And on that note too, if you guys are watching and you're enjoying the stream, please do like the video. We've got over 1,600 people in here. So please do like the stream. It really helps to push it out to YouTube so that more people can see us and join in and find both of us. Right. So that really, really helps. And if you are really, really enjoying it, we are on the road to 250,000 subscribers. We're almost there.
That's awesome.
There. We're at 247. So subscribing to the channel really helps with that. And if you are absolutely loving it and you really want to support the channel, there are memberships, as Sable Marquette has gifted some here. You can either join Bike Club through YouTube memberships or through Patreon sponsorship. You can sponsor over there. You get all kinds of perks, including members only live streams and early access to videos and stuff like that. But otherwise, if you can't, if you're too new to be able to make that kind of a commitment, that's totally fine. Just liking the stream is also great. Broken Baker, thanks so much for the super chat. Brandy is the best to get the details from. Always right on point with the facts. Love it. Definitely agree. Stella by the Sea, thanks for the super chat. Really enjoy your collab. I'm a follower of you both. Thanks for all your hard work. Love to see it. Wonderful. Yeah, it's always nice to have new collabs and just have conversations, especially when we're covering the same stuff.
Yeah.
And we might as well come together and talk about it together. Nick Starrow, the prosecution is trying to get a conviction by creating reasonable doubt in the defense theory. Yeah, and
it feels like it.
That's not how it works. That's just not how it works. It seems like maybe part of the strategy here by the defense is to create a big enough theory of this conspiracy for the framing argument, which there is a lot of evidence behind it. So, I'm not saying that it's not a real theory necessarily, or that they don't believe in that theory, but there also is a benefit to having this kind of very strong alternate theory, in that it can cause the prosecution to put them on the back foot, so that they are forced essentially to respond to that at the same time as they're trying to put on their case in chief. And at the same time, I mean, here in this particular case, you've got a prosecution team that is doing more work to try to rebut that defense theory than put on their own. And that's also a big issue.
Yeah.
So
it has felt like a defense case for so much of the Commonwealth's case. It felt like a defense against the Alberts and McCabe's, as opposed to a prosecution for Karen Reed. I think I would love to see the amount of time, like in comparison, that was spent in their case defending against the defense's theory versus the time that they spent addressing the actual, prosecution or case against Karen Reed. I would love to know the difference on time on what they actually spent.
That actually would be really interesting to find out those timestamps.
Yeah.
Let's get some questions here. Alley Cat. I hear the CW filed motions to admit information. Any idea what they are for? I saw something. Someone tagged me on Twitter or X, whatever it's called. Same. Somebody tagged me and said that they were requesting to be able to bring in a few more experts actually on rebuttal. I think one or two of them were going to be, or maybe one was an accident reconstructionist, accident reconstruction expert. Another one, I mean, obviously the dog bite expert, that's one that we expect to come in.
Yeah.
But the accident reconstruction one is interesting because that one, I think there's a chance that they probably will get that one in because of the late entry of the other two witnesses that we are going to hear from ARCA, Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rentschler. And so the judge may say it's only fair to allow these rebuttal witnesses or this rebuttal witness for that because of the fact that the prosecution didn't know about them when they were putting on their case in chief. At the same time, though, it also kind of makes you feel like, well, why didn't you put this person on during your case in chief when you had another accident reconstructionist who just didn't use math or physics?
Yeah.
Like it kind of gives them almost a second bite at the apple. And I would imagine the defense is going to argue that.
Yeah. Well, the two ARCA witnesses were on the list.
That's
but
true. That's a good point.
So I don't know if I know that they weren't able to have the the voir dire on who did what when they say we or who was in charge of what on the report, but they had the Fed report saying what their opinion was. So I don't know if that will make a difference in their deciding on her deciding what's allowed in or not, but
fair.
but it's interesting too because I agree with you, like why would they not have it the first? It's like almost like because Trooper Paul like bombed so terribly that now they're like, okay, well let's give it another go, and bring somebody else in. It's kind of how it comes across. But
yeah, and before I heard that the medical examiners would be like the last ones, and like those were when we basically figured out like these are the last witnesses. Now there's not going to be another accident reconstruction expert that comes in. Before that point, I was like, well, maybe they'll bring in someone else to talk about math, to talk about physics, or something that'll kind of help shore up. Like he's just the accident reconstruction expert who was like, this is the baseline stuff that we looked at. And then someone else is going to come in and like give more granular detail. That's what I was thinking maybe would happen.
Yeah.
But then when that turned out to not happen, I was like, oh, that's it. Like, okay, then this case is completely sunk. There's no causation. Like you can't have like a case like this where you really have to be able to understand how does a human arm shatter polycarbonate plastic, like something that's supposed to be able to withstand some pretty strong impacts.
Yeah.
Like how is it not that the human arm shatters first?
Right.
Like, like I want to understand that granular level of detail. Give me answers, right? Like help me understand so that I can be on your side.
Yeah.
But when they don't provide that, then I was like, well then that's it. They have the burden and they haven't met it.
That was one of my biggest things too. And I said that from the beginning. I need to know how this is a pedestrian vehicle incident, but there's nothing that we ever see in every single other pedestrian vehicle incident, because I went into this thinking like when I first started looking into this, the most likely thing is that she hit him. Like if he's in the yard, okay, he's not in the road, but he's in the yard, he's project, like you get hit and he's projected whatever, and I'm thinking that's what it'll show. But then when there's none of the injuries that match that or any of the, and even their expert saying, or the medical examiner saying, was it medical examiner I think was saying, you always see like injuries around the legs or knees where the bumper hits and all of these other things, none of that. But then the arm is cut up. if you're hit hard enough to bust that, those taillights are so strong. Even in the cold weather, I know that they get more brittle in the cold weather, but even then, they're still so strong for an arm to be able to break that, but then not break anything in the arm is wild to me, and I did not understand it. How can you not have bruising and fractures and all kinds of things here, but yet it was still enough pressure to break that taillight lens. And I talked to Dr. Kinsey, Kenneth Kinsey from, he's a friend of mine, and I talked to him. He did the Murdoch trial. He's done tons and tons of, reconstruction things. And I asked him about after all of that came out, I texted him and I was like, okay, so now we've heard their theory that it was, that they're saying that this was, the arm stuff was from the taillight and not from, I'm thinking they're going to tell us that something is going to line up with something underneath the car or something like that. And he said that in all of his experience, he has never once seen damage like that come from plastic lens. And I was like, okay, that's a whole bunch of decades that he's been doing this, and if he's never seen it and he's never, he doesn't think it's consistent. That's another, I don't know, for me, it's just, I was never able to get past that ability to understand that, which means I can't get past reasonable doubt.
Yeah. And the thing too is I remember listening very specifically at the medical examiner's explanation of that too, and how she was like, well, this is a taller vehicle, the bumper's taller and the taillight is taller. And so I was really happy that Elizabeth Little zoned in on that and focused in on that and said, okay, well, let's talk about John O'Keefe's body at the height where it lines up with the bumper, where it lines up with the taillight.
Yeah.
How do you explain that there were no injuries? What did the SUV do? Just like gently shovel him up into the air where he just landed on his head and that's it? Like that's not what happens, especially not at like 24 miles per hour, with a pedestrian who's just standing there, unless he's some kind of a superhero and he's in like a superhero stance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing about that too is my assumption going into it was also that they would, that there would be some kind of an explanation about like what his stance was when he was hit. I assumed that they would say, well, the reason why there's no other bruising on any other part of his body is because he was hit in the head by the SUV. Right. He must have dropped something to, went to pick it up and then got hit, and that's what sent him over. Like that's what I thought was going to be sort of the explanation, because that was the first thought that I had when I was looking at this and kind of being like, well, okay, this is a possibility here. And I think I mentioned that in the primer video of like, maybe there's something there that they're going to explain, and that'll be interesting to hear that side. But again, it just, none of that seemed to have been explored.
Right. Yeah. And I think with, think about how you think about like hitting a deer or something, and the impact that I hit a deer when, I was in college, and the impact it had to my car was, and I wasn't even going fast. I was on like, 35 mile per hour back road and hit one, and the damage to my car was bad. And you look at the damage on the car compared to, the damage on the car that we're seeing with this. And I think that people will automatically try to use their own personal experience, and what it's instinct. You think about, okay, this is what I know about this kind of situation. And when you're seeing something that's so different and doesn't line up with what you're used to or what your knowledge is, and it's something totally different, you need an explanation on why it's totally different so that you can understand it and accept it. And we were never given that. So I kept thinking, okay, if they show some kind of accident reconstruction situation where they're, like a video or, and because this happened this way, this is how this was avoided or whatever, make it make sense to us. But that was not done, and things were still conflicting. And you mentioned Elizabeth Little. She did a phenomenal job on that cross-examination.
Yes, I agree.
It was short and effective, and she just went through every single injury and had the medical examiner say, basically say like, this could also be consistent with your theory. And she did a phenomenal job, I think, on that.
I completely agree. It's my favorite kind of cross-examination that is like laser sharp, with surgical precision. You go through, you ask very short questions, and you go through deep, like point by point, and you've got even a good rhythm to it. And then you get in, you get out before you get any damage done to your side. That's my favorite kind of cross-examination. And that's just, yeah. So it was a prime example of that. 100%. I totally agree with you on that. And I mean, yeah, it's just all of these sort of explanations that we're looking for. And that's the thing, is it's almost like this is the theme of the prosecution's case in chief. And like everything from the beginning of the investigation all through trial is not enough was explored. Not enough answers were provided, from, I mean, the red Solo cups, right? Like I've got a meme for that one too. Red Solo cup, I fill you up.
It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous.
So bad. It is so bad that, like, I don't know how they got that far into analyzing this case, in terms of like the prosecution side. Like, how did they look at this case and see the red Solo cups and think, yeah, this will go over well?
Right. Yeah.
Prosecution's not going to jump all over this.
Right.
How is that possible? But then so many other issues, it just got worse from there. I didn't think that it could possibly get worse from there, but it did. And it continued to, all the way through Trooper Proctor and his text messages. And of course there's the two sides to those text messages, right? There's the abhorrent nature of all of the things that he called her. The fact that he disclosed private medical information, which is also a potential civil litigation claim that she could have against him, because the only reason why he had access to that confidential information about, her Crohn's disease and issues like that are through the fact that he was investigating this case. And so sharing that with people outside of the investigation is a disclosure of that private information. So yeah. There could be some possible civil litigation from Karen Reed against Trooper Proctor with that. But then, then on top of that, there's just the fact that he didn't bother to ask certain questions. And that was like another theme with so many people at Canton PD, so many people at the Massachusetts State Police. And now also, like, even with the prosecution, it's like, did you not go through and think about how this actually happened?
Yeah.
Did you sit and think about like what this would actually look like? It's just not enough was done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like the case is almost.
Yeah. Like everything. Yeah. And I went through and listed, oh gosh, look at me loudly, like clearing my throat before I talk. I'm gonna have PTSD from that. Every time he goes to ask something, he clears his throat, and then what if any us to death? But I did a list when the whole thing with the Sullivan sisters, bringing them to the stand. I was so mad and frustrated about that, because I made a list of all of the people that Proctor did not speak to, who were actually there around the time in question. The people who were like the other people, like, Ricky D'Antano and Heather Maxon and, Colin Albert and Lucky the snowplow driver and all of these other people that he didn't talk to for, a year or 2 years later. But he talked to Sullivan's little sister who got hollered at in Aruba, because drunk John was like hugging on her or whatever like that. And to me, that shows everything about where his head was at. And I am so frustrated about that, because it's like, and look, I'm not saying don't talk to her. If you think that that's your motive, explore it. But talk to these other people first. This is what's important. Like the people who can think about the details that could have potentially been remembered by people if they had talked to them in time, as opposed to, like, what's his name? The one who doesn't know anything about anything as far as time goes. Tristan. If, Tristan don't remember nothing about nothing. Okay, that's fine. Look, I'm the same way. I probably wouldn't remember anything about anything looking back either. But think about what he drove by right there twice. He drove by to pick her up, and then he pulled out and drove right by again. And I'm not saying like, oh, he would have remembered seeing a body, but just any kind of little detail, anything that, where people were parked, all of these questions that are unanswered still, and all of these people who are remembering things different. Memory is not like set in, like, it changes over time. It can be, you can hear other people's input on memory and it can alter yours because it starts giving you a fuller picture, and then you take on other memories as your own. It's psychological, like facts. This is proven, studies happen. People don't remember things, but
Yes.
in the very beginning, you're remembering detail better than you would 2 years later after hearing this case discussed, over and over and over and over. So I feel like there was such a ball that was dropped there, because if they had taken the time to speak to people who were there and like, tell me everything and have signed statements, record the statements, think about things that could have been potentially said that may not have seemed like a big deal in the beginning, but looking back, it could have been a big deal. And, all of those things, it could have helped close some of those holes in the beginning. And, but they were busy talking about, a fight in Aruba a month earlier.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And that's, and there's so much about that seems to hint to me. I was talking about this. Of course I was talking about the case with my husband over dinner last night. But like, there are so many things here that it started to feel to me like the characterization of Karen Reed by the prosecution, with all those 8 voicemails that they put on forward. I was like, what are they trying to prove with that? Because to me, it feels like this is a continuation of this argument that they had on the 28th. It didn't quite get resolved. They seem to be in this cycle, right? Like I've talked about this a couple times on my channel, but they seem to be in this cycle where she is somebody who has anxiety, and so she needs to have like intimacy with her partner in order to relieve that anxiety. But when they're in a fight, but then when they're in a fight, he's the opposite. He's avoidant. He wants space. He wants to be left alone, and that those two just feed each other. The more she tries to get in with him, the more he pulls away, and the more he pulls away, she tries, so it's just, if you don't know that kind of a cycle is happening, you don't see it, you don't recognize it or understand it, like that's something that you can just stay in that cycle for such a long time. And so to me, I was like, so now starting at 12:55 a.m. when she starts these voicemails, I'm like, well, she hasn't heard from him. And that's the thing that set her off the day before when she tried calling him 18 times and he only responded 3 times or picked up the phone 3 times. That's the thing that kind of sets her off more than anything, it seems like. So I was like, of course she's got angry voicemails where she's wound up, she's ramped up, that by the time she's talking with Carrie Roberts and with Jen McCabe, like she's basically lost her mind at that point. But like, so to me, I was like, this fits with the defense theory. Like, what's going on here? And I'm trying to think about it from the prosecution's perspective. And I was like, okay, either they think that she's trying to cover her tracks. That doesn't seem to make sense, because she would have been leaving voicemails that are more like, where are you? I love you. Like that kind of thing, as opposed to angry. And also, I don't think you can fake that kind of like what she was saying. Yeah. And so on the other side, I think that what the prosecution might be trying to suggest is that she was so angry at him that she hit him. And then she stayed angry for the next however many hours, continuing to call him, basically like spitting on his grave almost with these voicemails, calling him a pervert and saying, I effing hate you and all this kind of stuff. And like to say that like that rage was still there in that moment, like continuing on. And I was like, Karen just doesn't seem like that kind of person, because back in Aruba, when she thought that she actually caught him cheating on her with someone, she thought she saw them kissing. And, they had this big argument, this big fight over several days. There was no allegation of any kind of violence. There was nothing suggesting that turned into something violent, which that of course doesn't mean that it doesn't turn into violence later, that things can escalate in a relationship. But it was just like, that doesn't seem like what would be going on here. Like, it just doesn't fit with the overall pattern. Yeah. And so, and when I was thinking about that and thinking about the early focus on Karen and the early focus on the Sullivan sisters and all of that kind of stuff, and the way that they are portraying her, it kind of feels like this is me totally speculating and maybe engaging in my own level of pettiness, but it kind of feels like this is that this is descriptive of someone involved in this case, but it's not Karen Reed. It seems to me like this is a theory of who Karen Reed is as described by Jen McCabe. Yeah. So like, this is something that she kind of like directed people of like, this is who this person is. This is what she's like. This is what she would do.
Yeah.
like pure Regina George kind of tendencies in that. Like that's, like I said, speculation, take it with a grain of salt. You can accept it or not, like that's fine. But no,
but and I could see that because, and I even think about like the thing that struck me, because I kind of thought the same thing. It almost seems like everything has been, Jen McCabe was telling them different things, about whatever. And a lot of what they've referenced as far as who she is has come from them, because you look at the witnesses that were, testifying in the beginning, and you look at like the Kolakithas, and they're like, oh, like they were so lovey-dovey and they were, like happy and everything's fine. Mike Camerano, same thing. Like, they were like, everything was good. Everything was fine. And you hear about like all these people in the beginning talking about how, she did so much for the kids and all of that. And then you have Jen McCabe, who gets up there and is like, oh yeah, she heard Carrie Roberts say that she was a, glorified babysitter, a babysitter with benefits or whatever. And then she said that, she was so mad because Bella's mom lived over there. And that was, a huge argument about how Bella's mom lived over there or something. But it seems almost like everything that was said by her was just kind of like, oh, like Jen McCabe told them that, so then they're just going to go with that, and then everything else was built around that, as opposed to looking at potential other, like even just to rule it out. Even okay, let's say Jen McCabe was right about everything, that's fine, but it's like it seems like they kind of stopped right there and didn't take the time to look in other directions, just to at least just to rule it out so that there's not questions. And I thought that was really interesting. It's very telling though. The tech, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it yet. The full exhibit with all of their text messages tells a very different story than the ones that they handpicked and read out in court. They made a big deal about how she said that, that John's not cut out for this. There's a message of him saying, a text message that he sends her saying, how he's like stressed out about, being a parent and stuff and how he's not cut out for this. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, so much clicked in my head. I was like, she's not saying, he's not cut out for this to Higgins because she's dissing him. Those are his words. These are things that he's saying, and she's saying it too. And she sends this message that's like, you should be so proud of what you're doing with them. And you should, she said something about, I guess John was having issues with the niece. And she said something about, I know that you're, because he said the whole thing about her spoiling them. He's like, people do all these things for them, and then I have to be the bad guy. And that all of a sudden made sense to me. I'm like, oh, that's why he's upset about the iced coffee in the morning or whatever. And, she's sitting there telling him like she said something in the text about everything good about who she is as a person is because of what an amazing job you've done with her. And the way that she was so supportive of him, and he was the one saying in the text messages, I'm not cut out for this. Reading the entire text was such a different vision than what they presented in court, and it kind of blew my mind. And I'm glad that the jury will have access to all of that, because it tells a totally different story.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is really interesting. I wish it kind of makes me wish that the defense would have introduced a little bit more for context, because that is possible. You can make that argument to say, look, we need to be able to introduce more to properly contextualize these text messages. Maybe they tried and maybe they failed. Like, I'm not saying this defense team is like prime level defense team, right? So if there's something that they thought was a something that they should do, they would have done it. So, but maybe that's just they were unsuccessful in getting that in. It's entirely possible.
Well, it's in the thing where they just read certain parts. The jury will get that whole thing, right? Like they'll get the whole exhibit, because those text messages are in the exhibit, because these aren't the ones that are like from like way before. This is still in those. It's like in between those ones that were the first one, like about the plumber and all that. It's kind of like in between all of that. So it's on the exhibit. So I'm assuming that they will take the time to, I hope they will take the time to read that, because it, it does, I think it's like 53 pages of it or something like that, but
It's a lot. Yeah.
It's a very different story.
Yeah. I
though.
mean, so yeah, if all of that text thread was admitted as an exhibit, then, and it wasn't redacted, for example, because there were some where it sounded like they were only going to admit at certain portions of conversations, and then the rest were going to be redacted.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, if those were fully admitted, then those will go to the jury. So that would be interesting. That like they think that this conversation is one thing, and then they go in and read those texts, and they're like, whoa. Like again, the prosecution once again has led us down this road, and it still looks, because we've got the Sallyport footage, the
Sallyport, the
Sallyport, yes, yes, the where it was inverted. And then the it's just there just have been so many instances like that where there's been this like surprise of like the on direct examination the witness says one thing and they look really great, and then all of this new information comes out on cross, and you're like, okay, so the person for me to really listen to get the full story is defense here, cross examination. So there's been enough of that. So if that text conversation then comes in and they look at that and they're like, what the hell, like what is going on here, that's going to be, I mean, already they will be talking about it and talking about all the things, but that's a big deal. Edward Kirkpatrick, thanks for the super chat. No, CW knew of the ARCA guys same time as the defense, had same information as defense from FBI reports. Bev is who kept everyone away from that. Okay, so that's fair enough. As you mentioned, they were in fact in the defense's witness list. That I did see them as well. Dr. Marie was Marie Russell. She was the only one that was like the new one that wasn't on the list, and that's why Judge Canone, Judge Bev, why she had that full voir dire of her as opposed to the other guys. It was just going through their qualifications as opposed to like what it was that they were concluding. So that's fair. So maybe that makes me go back on what I said before about like them getting another expert witness in for the prosecution. That cuts away from their argument. That cuts in favor of the defense, saying, no, you're getting a second bite at the apple here. You knew about these guys. You knew what they were going to testify to. You knew that you needed to put on an expert to combat all of the things that they were going to say, and you didn't do it ahead of time. Too bad. So sad. You're too late. Whether or not the judge goes for that, who knows? But yeah, we'll see. Miss Marple, thanks for the super chat. Is it normal to have only one DA voice in a case like this? I think with a case that's this high profile, I would say it's not normal. It's not normal. But it does happen. I mean, with the Rust Armorer case, which was the last one that I live streamed, that one was Hannah Gutierrez Reed on the set of Rust. She was the armorer on the film set when the cinematographer ended up dying. Alec Baldwin movie. Anyway, so in that one, they had a double team. Most of it was Carrie Morrissey, the main prosecutor on the team, but they still had some cross examinations and some stuff that was done by the other side. So it's not uncommon for it to be like heavier with one of the attorneys. But he's literally doing all of the direct and all of the cross. That it is surprising to me, to be honest, because that is something that can definitely exhaust someone. And I think, and at this point in the trial, I do wonder if part of that is also kind of weighing on Lally at this point. Maybe he's a little burned out because he seems to be getting emotional on those cross examinations on Friday. So yeah, we'll see. Manny Fabani, thanks for the super chat. Can you show that cool 3D model you discussed before? So I actually talked about this with Byte Club. Have you come across this? There's a channel that does like 3D renderings.
Microdots. Or the other one, the one that did the 3D of the theory of how I've seen that one. I don't remember the name of the channel.
Yeah. But. That one is, oh gosh, I totally I showed it during my members only live stream yesterday, and then I also tweeted about it because I wanted to get in contact with the content creator. But this one, it was Asget Industries. That's the one. So this one is, have you seen this one by any chance?
I don't know. Which one is it? I've only seen one.
Okay, well maybe I can play this one and then we can talk about it. It's a very short video. And so it's like 2 minutes long. So we can let's play it and then we can talk about it too. Like this is another thing that just introduces so many questions, right? Because another complaint that I've had about the prosecution here is like lack of visuals, lack of like visuals while they're talking. Like when they are, going through the autopsy, show the diagrams when you're first talking about it, show the photos when you're first talking about it. Don't go through it again, this time just introducing all of this imagery, show the things that you're talking about as you're explaining, especially where it's like very wordy and kind of complex, sometimes technical kind of stuff. So let me share the screen here. All right. Okay, here it is. So this is Asget Industries. And this is about Trooper Joe Paul's testimony. Let me know if you have any issues with hearing it.
Hi guys, this is a 3D illustration of Trooper Joe Paul's take on how the evidence shows Karen hit John O'Keefe. This is Trooper Joe Paul. He is the expert witness for the prosecution, and with all of his data points, we're going to show you his point of view on how this happened. Starting from this viewpoint in real time, Karen backs up hitting John and continues all the way to the edge of the driveway. Trooper Paul's opinion is that John has been sideswiped by the SUV, pushing him to the ground, hitting his head on the concrete, and causing him to be knocked unconscious. The trooper does little to explain how John's body was actually found 10 feet in the yard with his phone under him, other than that to say that's just how it happened.
Right? Like I refer to this as the trust me bro explanation. Like this is just like the it just happened. That's just how it happened. He spun around. And by the way, Alan Jackson does a really great pirouette in the courtroom. When I saw that, I was like, I wonder if he really cuts it up on the dance floor at weddings.
Yeah, it was kind of like it made it almost like kind of highlighted like the ridiculousness of the theory, I think. And so it was, I know I saw some people were mad that he did that and said it was disrespectful, but like the whole point of it is to show that this theory is not exactly, the math ain't mathin' on it. And so I thought it was a good visual.
Yeah. Okay, so let's
the pirouette.
Yeah, no, exactly. I completely agree. It's basically to kind of point to the nonsensical nature of like how you can even say that happened. Like what are you even describing? Is this what you're describing, or is that like I almost wish that he had like done several different interpretations of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it also just would have been just so entertaining. But just to show like, what are you saying? What are you telling the jury happened here?
Yeah. Stuff happened.
Exactly. the things, all the things.
God. Zooming out and starting at the beginning, I added these blue marks to indicate each half second according to the expert's testimony. One of the things to take notice with this new data is how far Karen drove in reverse.
Right into Brian Higgins' Jeep.
Yeah, right.
Before Karen was reversing, she was driving.
Like that's the other thing here is that this doesn't even show Brian Higgins' Jeep like right here or right here, wherever it was. Either way, it would have totally run into it.
Away from John at 11 miles per hour, according to this expert. So let's start at that point. John watches Karen drive away. He watches her come to a stop, pause for 2.5 seconds, and then start to reverse towards him. This moment of impact is going to create a lot of noise. Picture taking a bat and breaking out the rear taillight, or taking a glass and throwing it into the back of a vehicle, having it shatter. The amount of noise created by this would certainly be heard by those inside the house. All this data is based on key cycles that Trooper Paul claims represents this point of time, but the defense believes he's wrong on that, and in this next video I'm going to show you why. Now a little quick self-promotion. I'm trying to create a deal with Netflix for a documentary. They've already used some of my work in their Murdoch series, and engagement is certainly a metric they consider. So if you like my work, it'll go a very long way if you guys like, share, and comment, not just on this video, but any of my videos. And once again, thank you guys for watching and for following me.
So yes, that's the video, short and sweet. All of her videos are basically like that. They're very short and sweet. And I will actually, let me link to this in the chat, and then I will update in the description as well, so that anyone can go and check out her stuff. Like, go like the videos and subscribe to the channel. Like this is a very high quality channel, obviously. I just thought that was so interesting to share. And it's like,
Mhm.
but again, it's like, this is what we're looking for, right? Is to be able to somehow recreate it. And she's kind of saying like, what exactly happened here? Like, how do they explain how this happened other than trust me, bro?
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's one of the hardest things. Like, and I kept waiting for that moment for them to get to the point where, and I had said all along, I was like, I think that there's so many issues that if they could show me how this lines up, I don't know that it would be enough to get me past reasonable doubt because of so many other issues, but it would be the first major step that I needed. And I kept waiting to see if they were going to be able to show me that, because I thought like, okay, if they can show me this, then I may believe that she did this. Mm-hmm. I don't know that I would believe it beyond a reasonable doubt because like I said, like this is not the only issue, but right. I think it would be the first step in me thinking like, for sure, like in my mind, this is at least like if this were like a civil case, it is more likely than not that she did it. I would at least be able to get to that point instead of like, I don't know what happened. But because that moment never came and they were never able to explain how what we just saw could happen and not hit Higgins' phantom Jeep with a plow on it, or, not crush his arm or, hit his legs or, do any kind of other damage, Yeah. I think not being able to get to that. I used the analogy the other day when we were talking about this on the channel, where I feel like this is not one of those cases where, like, if you imagine a case is like a, like a canoe or something, and like there's like these little holes, but you can like, kind of like Twister, like you put your, 1 foot over this hole and 1 foot over this and like a finger in this one, and like everything's, it can still float. This theory doesn't float because these are not just like little holes that, can still get you past that. Their boat's sinking because there's too many holes in it that you just can't plug. And for me, I like I said, I couldn't send somebody, to prison based on this evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And that's a really great analogy that you've got all these holes that just keep springing up, and you try to plug one, and then there's another one that comes up and you try to plug another one. And it seems like they've tried to put plastic wrap over these holes.
Yeah.
To sort of cover them up, but then it's still going to come right through.
Yeah.
So it's pretty rough at this point. The attempts that they have tried to make to try to fill those gaps, they don't feel like they've actually made an earnest attempt at them. That's right. The big problem here.
Yeah.
Megan Rose, thanks so much for the super chat. Why didn't they try and get DNA from Colin and Chris to see if it matched the other DNA found on John? Another question that's just unanswered. I don't know why, but it's just another one of the many, right, that are just out there that I don't know if we'll ever get answered, other than, hey, they zeroed in on Karen right away and decided to ignore everyone else for one reason or another. Kathleen Tackett, thanks so much for the super chat. The reason no one else was questioned in the house was because there was no need, since this is a frame/cover-up. Proctor wasn't doing a real investigation. And then it looks like you sent another one with the same thing. Thanks you so much for the super chats. Yeah, I mean, but you don't even, like I said before, you don't even need to go that far to say that this was a frame or cover up. You can just say they had confirmation bias. They made a conclusion too quickly, and then they looked for information that confirmed that bias. So, like either of those is an option, and we'll still get you to the same place. MLS God of Law, thanks for the super chat. Brandy is awesome. Oh, and Legalbytes too. Brandy is awesome. I'm so happy to have her here.
Thank you.
Michael Corey, thanks for the super chat. My legal opinion can't just bring in a wit on rebuttal because your wit bombed. There was no surprise / new info. Therefore, no second bite at the apple. That's fair enough. I mean, if they had the reports from both of those witnesses in advance, there really is no excuse then. So I take back what I originally said with that information, that they really should have shouldn't have a chance to have another reconstructionist come in, just because now that all of a sudden they realize how badly their reconstructionist is being mocked by everyone.
Mhm.
And not mocked as in like mocked like an exhibit.
Yeah.
Like,
Mocked.
exactly. But this is someone who literally said the crime scene told me this information, when Alan Jackson was clearly looking for a person that was a source of information. And he said, the crime scene told me. And when Alan Jackson asked follow-up questions to try to clarify that, like, you don't actually mean that metaphorically, right? You don't actually mean that the crime scene literally talked to you. And then he was like, yeah, the crime scene told me. It was just one of those that, like, okay, maybe he was just super nervous. He was already nervous on direct, obviously.
Yeah.
Maybe he knew that what he was there was like super shaky at best, but that kind of an answer was just like, you cannot have an expert saying something like that. You just can't. That is someone who, in my opinion, I really, my overall impression of Trooper Paul was that he was somebody who was sacrificed to the wolves. Like, he was set up to fail from the very beginning by whoever was his supervisor, by Lally, by the whole DA's office, by having him go in there and say with a straight face that these are the conclusions that the jury can hang their hat on. And his answers are things like, the crime scene told me, because he doesn't want to tell the jury that the source was probably Trooper Proctor or something like that.
Right. And even the information that he had that he used, he's told about, where Officer O'Keefe was found by somebody who never saw Officer O'Keefe there, so all of the information that he even got was not accurate enough for me on what I would need for a reconstruction. And I know that the ARCA guys, the crash daddies is what chat has been calling them, the crash daddies, when they come in, like, I know that they're not going to be coming in to tell us like, this is how it happened. They're going to come in and tell us, based on, this impact and this motion and this injury and this, whatever, this could or could not have happened. And it's not like a reconstruction thing. So, because I saw some people were saying like, well, they don't know either. But that's not what they're coming in for. So I think it's, even though they're not coming in to tell us how this crash could or could not have happened, I feel like I am so anxiously and excitedly awaiting what they say, because I need to hear if this could or could not happen, because I have a feeling I know what they're going to say, because they're on the defense witness list and not the prosecution witness list. But me as just a little old nobody who, like sits here and watches along and discusses everything with everybody, I need to hear that from them. And that's not something that he was able to give us. Oh, the crime scene told him. I just wanted to like sink in my chair for him in that moment.
Yeah. Yes. I think if I remember correctly, I may have paused it and been like, he didn't just say what I thought he did he? like, what are we, like, hang on now. What are we talking about here? What are we doing here? If this is it, like, am I taking crazy pills at this point? Like, what is happening?
It feels like it sometimes, doesn't it? Doesn't it feel like this is like you remember like Mad TV or like Saturday Night Live? Like, doesn't it feel sometimes like what we're watching is that instead of an actual trial? And then when Alan Jackson was like, okay, well, did the crime scene tell you anything else? I was like, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. And, I literally, I do remember this. I was like, is the crime scene in the room with you right now? like, tell me, like, I'm going to hold up this chart. Tell me on this chart where the crime scene hurt you. Like,
oh my gosh. Like, I would like to enter my magic 8-ball or my crystal ball into, evidence as, oh gosh, it's just the ridiculousness of it. It's like when you're so desperately wanting facts and explanations and to make things make sense, and that's what you're given. It's like, oh gosh, really?
Yeah. Agreed. Be rational and nice when in this global sandbox. Sorry. Thanks for the super chat. KR case helps FBI in VT. What's VTGAT in VTGAT?
Investigation?
Investigation. Oh, I guess so. And defense shared evidence. Yeah, I mean, they have similar interests, right? So there's good reason for them to share evidence in their similar cases, right? So that ultimately is helpful to both of them to share what they have been able to get, and that's how these experts were ultimately found, and why they're here for the defense. It's one of those things that is a benefit of having a high profile trial sometimes. Like I've talked about this too. We saw this in spades with the Depp v. Heard case, right? Where there were two surprise witnesses at the very end that were rebuttal witnesses because they had been seeing the proceedings or hearing about the proceedings, I guess. And they realized that they had information that they could give that would be helpful to either side of the case, helpful to the jury, really is how it should be. And they came in and testified, and they were allowed to because no one knew about them. The plaintiff side, the defense side, nobody had any notice of who these people were, would have no idea who they were based on their discovery and everything. They volunteered themselves. And so they were surprise witnesses, and they came in because of the high profile nature of the case, because of the same thing with the Milani makeup kit, right? Like that was a thing that became, that I think influenced Amber Heard's trial team, because they realized, oh no, if we go further with the idea that this is the actual makeup kit, which Elaine Bredehoft held up in opening statement saying, this is it. This is the kit that she used to cover up her bruises that he gave her in 2015 or whatever that was, like early on. And then Milani comes out and says, that product didn't exist at that time. Sorry, too bad. 6 months later, maybe.
Or Murdoch with the infotainment information that they were able to get from the car. They had the telematics or whatever it was from the car. I think that they had tried to get it before and couldn't get it, and then the case was going on, and then all of a sudden they were because of the high profile, then they were like, oh yeah, we can get that for you. And so the high profile stuff, it's one of those things, like when you have this many eyes on something, it's kind of, it crowdsources a whole different set of eyes and ears and expertise that you would never have before.
It can totally happen. And it's so funny because these high profile cases also get a lot of criticism for, mostly because of people like us, right? The media doesn't like people like us. They say, like, we can't be trusted. We are influencing the jury somehow, even though the jury is told expressly every single day, stay away from the media, stay away from social media, don't look up the case. So like my assumption is none of the jurors are watching anything that we're saying or doing or talking about. Like, of course, just because, or in the same way that I assume that they are also not watching anything on TV about it.
Yeah.
And yet there's this whole thing about like social media people. It's really because we're taking away attention from the eyeballs on their screens. That's really where that comes from, in my opinion. Yeah. But like, that's one of the big criticisms, is that like, somehow these high profile cases have an impact from social media and all this kind of stuff on like jury pools and on the jury. There can be an influence on like jury pools. It can make it harder to find a jury that hasn't heard about the case, hasn't made, some sort of opinion about the case. But, in every single high profile trial, you are able to find 12 people. You can find 12 people, out of a pool of, hundreds, thousands of people, if necessary. You can find them if you need them.
Yeah.
And like, even in the Boston area, like the area outside Canton, Massachusetts, you can still find people who don't care to pay any attention to high profile trials.
Right.
But like, that's where these high profile trials really get influenced, is by the people finding the defense teams, the people finding the prosecution or the plaintiff's teams and saying, I have information that could be helpful to you. Or those legal teams watching the things that we're saying, the things that we're doing, media coverage, of course. But I say this because of personal experience, where I've said something on a live stream and then later learned that someone from that legal team had been watching and was like, I'm going to use that.
Yeah.
That can happen, which is interesting. But so high profile cases, and sharing, evidence and things like that. The fact that the whole federal investigation even exists because of the public outcry, all of that can be influenced by the fact that so many people get interested in these things.
Yeah.
Debbie Faison Cook, member for 19 months. Thanks so much for being a member for so long, and also one of our awesome mods on the channel. Thanks so much for being here, Brandy. Agreed.
Oh, thank you.
Great discussion. Be rational and nice when in this global sandbox. So KR defense giving some PI evidence to FBI fallout. there could be some fault. Yeah, there could be.
Yeah.
Megan Rose, thanks for super chat. Did they extensively photograph the car before they towed it like they're supposed to? No, that's the other thing. It's like there are just so many almosts, like things that they could have done to secure this case one way or another, right? Like that's the thing is like going into this, I really was, like we talked about at the beginning of the stream, we both were very skeptical of this idea that the defense was framed, but and saying like, I want to hear the best information from both sides. The best information from the prosecution is not much information at all, which is an absolute shame for everyone, for the community that's supposed to be represented by the prosecution, for the O'Keefe family, for John O'Keefe himself, for Karen Reed. Like everyone involved in this case that is touched by this case is affected by the quality of the investigation and the quality of the prosecution.
Yeah. That's one thing I've said all along too, is like, if you like, because so many people have said like she's guilty before the trial even started on whatever evidence, whatever, that's okay, fine. But even those people, I'm like, if you are convinced that she is guilty, you should be pissed off too. You should be so mad at this investigation, because look at how many holes they left open for interpretation and how many doors they didn't close, as far as other things are involved. Everybody, no matter what side you fall on, or if you're in the middle, every single person should be furious about this investigation and how things were handled. And I don't understand how they're not. If that were your family member and this investigation was like that, I mean, I would be furious.
Yes. Same, because it sparks so many questions about like, is this their MO? Is this the best that they can do? Because my assumption is this is a case that involves a dead cop. This is a case that is high profile. So the assumption would be they are going to bring the best that they can bring for this case in all aspects. And so then you're like, okay, this is your best. This feels like J team at most. So then what does it look like? I mean, are there other times when you bring your A game, or is this actually your A game? And what does your JV team look like? Right. What is this like when you've got somebody who's like an average person, not some kind of, a cop or something like that they should really care about, right? Like one of their own, part of the thin blue line, right? This is someone that they should care about. What about the person that has some sort of crime, or they're a victim of a crime and they don't necessarily have as much of an interest in investigating them as much, but they still should. Like what happens to them? What happens to their family members? What happens to other defendants that are in these cases that, maybe they're the people that should be convicted and they get away, because of the investigation, or vice versa. It's just, there's just so much there. Michael 555, how often do you see a case make it to trial? They end up farther from preponderance of the evidence than when you started. I can't say that I have personally. I mean, well, okay. Every case starts with a question, right? A series of questions. And when we're talking about criminal cases, it's always, in any kind of a case, civil or criminal, the defendant never has a burden of proof unless they've asserted some kind of an affirmative defense. So, you always have to start with innocent until proven guilty. Has the prosecution met their burden? And so every single case kind of starts from that default. And if you end up landing on the side of the defense, you have ultimately gone, away from that initial space of like, just a basic question. You've basically said, no, I believe the defense, or I don't think that the prosecution has even answered any of these. But here, I do feel like I started with a certain number of questions and I ended with more. And that's not what you want in any kind of a case. Yeah. Not if you're on the prosecution side. Uncivil Law, thanks for the super chat. Hey, man, good to see you here. Isn't the crime scene told me a hearsay problem? Let's go into the stand and hear it firsthand. Agreed. Did you take any notes when you had conversations with the crime scene? Is this discoverable? James Casatelli, thanks for the super chat. The federal investigation started a few months after John's murder. The way before public outcry. That just FYI. Okay, that's I did not know that. Thank you for that bit of information. That's really helpful. Breezy 2503. Hello, Brandy and Legalbytes. Thanks for this Sunday AM stream. Laundry can wait. Who needs work clothes? We are still on jury duty this week. LOL. Oh man, that's awesome. Thanks so much for showing up and hanging out with us. Leo Baker, thanks for the super chat. Lexus uses the same satellite emergency system that Murdoch's GMC uses. Every movement and speed of the Lexus is in some server. Interesting. And that's something that I really want to hear from. I think it's going to be Dr. Wolf, is about he was the one that had all the detailed information about the Lexus. And I think the infotainment system is going to be one of those. I really want to hear what he has to say about whether or not that was something that they could have drawn out, because if Trooper Garino was wrong about that, and he was like, well, we corrupted it because that was just what happened, and we had our best efforts and whatnot, and it just didn't work out. And if he's wrong about that, then that certainly looks like, did you really want that information? Were you actually trying to get it or not?
Yeah.
There's
other things like that too that have come up that I'm like, that I am excited to hear, I hope that they bring it up. That was one of them. But also, the deleted, didn't he say that there was deleted? I have to go back and listen, because we talked about this with the ADHD, things come and go. Did he say that there was GPS or location data deleted in April from her phone? And that's after the police had it, right? Do you remember hearing that?
Wait, sorry. Say it one more time.
When Green, I think it was Green, was on the stand, did he say that there was location data that was deleted from Karen Reed's phone in April? But that was after they had her phone, and it was...
Yeah.
And she no longer had access to it because they said that they put it in airplane mode right away, right? So, So who deleted information from her phone?
Yeah. Yes. Also very interesting.
Yeah.
That was a point that, actually it's interesting, because right at that moment, I forgot about that particular question, because the next question was Lally trying to sneak in testimony about Karen Reed's DUI lawyer Google search, which was something that expressly he was told by the judge that he wasn't allowed to get into. Yeah. I was super pissed about that, because that was a dirty move. Like there are plenty of things that you can point to here that and give Lally the benefit of doubt of, like, maybe he didn't know about X. Maybe he really didn't know that this footage was actually inverted in the Sally port, in the Lally port, right?
Right.
Maybe, like, there are some things that's like, okay, maybe he didn't know about this other conversation that this witness had with so-and-so because he was out of the room for that part of the meeting or something. And there's at least some plausible deniability. But with that question, I was like, okay, you've been on location data, and now all of a sudden you ask about a Google search in the afternoon on January 29th, 2022 about that being deleted, and that being by the defendant. I'm sorry, what other Google search are we talking about? I was so upset about that, and I'm still mad. I'm still really mad about it.
Yeah. It was dirty. I feel like he's been dirty a few times. I think he knows that this case is not going how he wanted it to, and I think he's been dirty a few times because of that. It's like it's not a good look. I don't like it.
No. I that was the thing that told me, like, he doesn't have plausible deniability anymore at this point. Like, right. This is a dirty lawyer here. And I don't like coming to that conclusion. I'm always someone who's going to give the benefit of doubt whenever possible. But seeing that, I was like,
yeah,
that's you were told by the court. You tried to argue it. You had a full argument with the other side. You were told, and you should have known even before that point that was wrong.
Yeah.
So let me get a couple of questions from Twitter really quick here. Alrighty. This one's from Mike. Let's see if I can zoom in on this. So
the
this is the timeline here. Oh. So I wanted to bring this up because you've got all the data points, right? Yeah. So Garino, 1232, OJO phone stops moving. Garino, 1236, defendant's cell phone connects to OJO Wi-Fi. Jen McCabe, 1240, saw SUV outside and texted, hello. Lally, 1245, defendant hit OJO. Lucky, 230, no OJO on lawn at 34 Fairview. WTF.
Yeah. This one is, I laugh about how like this one just gives I love doing my timelines and helping like try to make everything make sense. And this one has like, this is the reason I drink at night, because I'm joking. I don't really, but but this is like the reason I have headaches all the time trying to make it work. And just none of the timeline stuff makes sense at all.
Yeah. No, I agree. Here's another question here. Oh, let's see here. We'll do it this way. So this is from Black Lives Matter. Burning question: how is there a prosecution of an intentional homicide when the Emmy literally said she couldn't rule out a fight or an accidental death? I am confusion. I mean, that's another thing here is that, the medical examiner, that should have been another clue for the prosecution that this is a case that should not have moved forward, in my personal opinion. If you can't hang your hat on that, what can you hang your hat on? If there's a huge issue with causation here, and I don't think that the prosecution is going to be able to fix it, because the medical examiner, and sometimes you can get away with undetermined if you have a good explanation as to why they couldn't find it undetermined, or why they couldn't determine anything specifically.
Yeah,
because she did say, she was like, look, I had 90 days to come to a conclusion here. Based on the information I had, I couldn't come to a conclusion. And in a normal case, in a case outside of this weird upside down world of the Karen Reed trial, you could say the investigation itself went further than 90 days. And therefore there was more information that came out later. And then, ask the medical examiner, if you had known this, if you had known that, how would that have impacted your determination? There are ways that you can work around that. But here we have a lead investigator who said, yep, 16 hours in, I know who did it.
Yeah.
So it just makes that even more unreasonable for him to have concluded that, which of course, not everyone, right? Let's be real. Not everyone agrees, but a lot of people see that and see through that and say like, how can you possibly have concluded that? This is another example of how can you possibly have concluded that?
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing for me too, like, and this is something that we discuss. I am very big in, when we're watching it, like I love hearing everybody's opinions and everybody's theories. Like you don't have to stick to one theory or the other. This is not, you choose either the defense's theory or the prosecution's theory. It's the prosecution's theory or anything else. So, we have discussed that too. The fact that she was able to, when Little was able to walk her through that cross-examination and have her concede that these things are consistent with a fight, that does not mean like two things can be true at once. You can believe that this could have been from some kind of fight or accident or anything else, and you can believe that the data that shows that he doesn't go in the house. You don't have to say, okay, well, this is a fight. That means that he had to have gone in the house and gone to the basement and been drug outside. You don't have to accept all of the other things. All you have to accept is that something else reasonable other than the prosecution's theory happened. And I think that's where a lot of people are struggling with this, because it's like, one of the biggest pushbacks I hear when people are relentlessly attacking me is, as we're discussing this, it's like, well, this couldn't have happened and this couldn't have happened. No, I'm not saying it did. All I'm saying is this doesn't look to me like it's the only reasonable explanation. So it doesn't, like all of the other details, you don't have to put together a full picture on this side. If this full picture doesn't work, that's all, that's the end of the game. Like it doesn't matter. If there's any other reasonable explanation that could have potentially happened, and that cross-examination on the medical examiner where they're saying this could have also reasonably been an explanation, and then having I mean what I'm anticipating based on what we've heard so far of the ARCA people coming in and saying these injuries are not consistent. I feel like with just those two alone, forget everything else, with just those two alone, I don't see how anybody could get past reasonable doubt on just those two alone.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree on all that. Edward Kirkpatrick, thanks for the super chat. Remember, troopers flew to California to interview Natalie, but never got around to Lucky until Turtle Boy, whatever you think of him, had Lucky interview. That's again, yeah, just where the priorities were in this investigation. Thanks for the super chat. With the state case finished, who done it? I thought slip and fall plus bad cops trying to get their man, but arm injuries don't fit that theory. So, well, yeah, I mean, that's the other thing too, is like at this point, the jury could also be thinking, maybe he was just walking up to the house and he slipped and fell, and and then Jen McCabe heard Karen Reed the next morning with her hysterics, and then thought, it was her. And then all of a sudden, like it just like, somehow grew into something that it wasn't. Like they could end up coming up with their own theory.
Yeah.
Really. And the defense wins. Jennifer D, thanks for your super chat. They can't bring OJO back to life, but they can help keep another officer out of prison. Cops don't do well in prison. Karen is just an easy target to point the finger at. Sad that this can happen to anyone. Agreed. Candace Hoff, thanks for the super chat. So glad to see Brandy this morning. Catch her tonight on Broken Baker. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Awesome. So more collabs for Brandy. That's awesome. Stella by the Sea, thanks for being a member for 1 month. J.O. KO'd by CA/BA. So let's see. So John O'Keefe was KO'd by Colin Albert, and Brian Albert seized and bled in the basement, put in the yard. It's possible. It's just as plausible, if not more of a plausible theory than anything that the prosecution has put forward. San DB, thanks for the super chat. There wasn't several people that heard Karen say, "I hit him." That is a lie, not in reports. If she said it in front of any cop, the cuffs would have been slapped on. Yeah, that's another thing is, that's one of the common refrains from people who I have seen have said consistently, she's guilty, she's guilty, she's guilty. They say, well, she said I hit him. But there's also like, there is so much nuance to whether or not she even said that in the first place. When did people first start reporting that? The fact that Jen McCabe, to me, that really stuck out very strongly in her cross-examination was when Jackson was the one who did her cross, I think, right?
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. And so when Jackson was like, interesting. So you didn't say it in this report, and you didn't say it in this report. The first time you said it was at this hearing.
Yeah.
What was the thing that came out right before that hearing? There was a leak to the public about, this idea that you did this Google search and people started hating you for it. And that's when you started saying that, affirmatively that she said, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him.
Yeah.
Like the timing of that is just so suspicious that to me, it calls into question the veracity of those statements early on.
I agree. And, the thing is, if you're sitting there in front of a bunch of cops confessing, they're not going to be like, hey, y'all go ahead and get her out of here. She's hysterical. Like go ahead and take her home and then, send her on a Section 12 and then let her go home to her family. If she had, been running around there confessing to police officers that she did this, then that was supposedly, like between 6 and 7 a.m. And then at 10:41, Buchanan's calling the medical examiner's office saying, like, this is, suspicious. This might be a physical altercation or, domestic dispute or however it was worded. If she's confessing, it just wouldn't have been that. If she did say, I hit him, or if she said, did I hit him? To me, the way that everybody has described her mannerisms and her demeanor that morning, it seemed like she was panicking and not knowing what was happening, and she was, hysterical, to use their word, and not like kind of it seemed like she was trying to make sense of everything and figure things out. So if I feel like people are hanging their hat on that, if it wasn't enough for the police that were standing right in front of her to hang their hat on, then I don't know how it's enough for, the rest of these internet streets to hang their hat on. If they didn't think it was important enough to put in their reports, and even even like Buchanan said that we knew going into it because Sergeant Good said that she said I hit him, and Sergeant Good testified I never heard her say that. So it's not what people I think are making that out to be.
Yeah. And that's because that's the other thing too, that you pointed at, is that, I said that, first there's the question of whether or not she said it. Then there's a question of, is that an indication of what her mental state actually was? Right. Because there's this whole whole windup that she got into before she was even calling Carrie and calling Jen. And, initially early on, I was like, okay, like that is kind of weird that she wound herself up that quickly, but maybe she's just that kind of person. She's high anxiety and she just gets herself into that kind of a state. But again, that's why those 8 voicemails to me were like so illuminative that I was like, well, of course she was wound up. Like that makes sense to me. That's even more reasonable to me now.
Yeah.
But at the point that she was, when she was with Carrie and with Jen and looking for John, the fact that she was saying things like their testimony was helpful to the defense, in my opinion, in that it was, they were talking about how she was sitting there in the car and going, Jen. She's sitting right in front of her. Carrie's sitting right in front of her, going, Carrie. And like when they were first describing it, I was like, okay, that's weird. But then hearing that actual butt dial voicemail that Karen left for John O'Keefe on his phone, where you can hear it and you hear just how hysterical it actually does sound. And you're like, this doesn't sound like someone who is in their right mind. Yeah. It calls into question, can you even trust the words that are coming out of her mouth, that they even have a connection to other neurons firing in her brain?
Right.
Or is she just like saying things because she's lost touch with reality in that moment because of like everything that has happened, starting from the windup from the day before, and then those early hour mornings, or the early morning hours, I should say, the fact that she hasn't really slept the night before. And then all of a sudden, like her boyfriend who she seems to love, even though they've got a lot of fighting going on and it's unclear whether or not they're going to be breaking up. You can still love someone that you also sometimes hate.
Right.
That kind of stuff can happen. That could have been the thing that just broke her brain. And suddenly she's saying things that don't make sense. Yeah. I remember when I first heard, the reasoning from people saying, well, the whole thing, I hit him, is, she was trying to make sense of a situation that just doesn't make sense. Her brain, she was trying to rationalize it in her brain, how that could have happened. Like, could I have hit him? Did I hit him? And then I hit him. And I remember at first I was like, yeah, but that's also kind of a convenient excuse for making an admission. I remember thinking about that in advance and being a little bit skeptical of that one too. But this progression of information that's come out has been like, well, okay, now I understand it. And it's actually kind of a plausible explanation.
Yeah. And I thought too, because, the text that we saw where she's like, I'm going home, I'm leaving, like your kids are alone. When I saw that, I was like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense, because she's like, she knows that he would never leave the kids home alone overnight. So she fell asleep and then woke up and and to me that sounded like she was trying to, make him come home. And so for her to wake up and panic because he wasn't there, like she knows that he would not have left them there alone. I'm like, okay, that makes a little bit more sense to me. And I'd even thought about the deleted Ring videos. Like if she's trying to convince him that she left to go home, if she had access, maybe she deleted the videos of her coming home so that or getting to his house so that he wouldn't know that she was there, so it would make him come home. But then all of this stuff came out about like, okay, there was never any login for it on his computer. That was huge, because all this time we've been hearing about how they, say that she deleted these videos, and they're saying on the forensic download of the computer or whatever that there was, or however they did it, I can't remember, everything's running together. But however it was, they determined that there was no login for Ring on the computer, and that there was no list of her deleting any of the videos. And the only ones that we know, the ones that we know at this point for sure who had access to the Ring videos were the police, because it's in the report that they accessed it through his phone. So if it was only accessed through his phone, but that was something I'd even considered too. Like, okay, well, maybe if there's deleted videos, maybe she deleted them because she's trying to make him think that she's not there so that he'll come home. But even that was, kind of proven not possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And on top of that too, I can't remember how exactly it came in, but I remember there was some kind of testimony about Trooper Proctor talking to someone from Ring Corporation about the footage and investigating into the footage. And the response, the answer that we got back was Trooper Proctor had learned from talking to the Ring Corporation that if someone had deleted something from the footage, there's no digital footprint of that. No one would know. So like that, to me, I was like, wait a minute. So he knew that something could be deleted. and no one would know, and he had access to it. Karen Reed apparently didn't have access to it from what we've seen and what we've heard. So like that makes it even more suspicious that something could have been deleted. Like that makes it even more likely that it could have been Trooper Proctor that could have deleted something. I'm not necessarily saying that is exactly what happened, but there's the opportunity that's opened up by that.
That's the thing. It's like, it's, no, proving that it happened is not, necessary. Knowing that it could happen that's the doubt that, like that. So hearing a lot of those things come out and come together, it's single thing has been, when you're expecting to continue hearing from the prosecution through their case in chief, you're expecting to hear all these things that support their theory. And instead, all of the things that are coming out through their case are either directly going against their theory or supporting an alternate theory. It's like at some point, everything starts looking more and more suspicious, especially with Proctor, because he's a dirtbag.
It does. And now my viewers they're gonna yell at me if I don't play it. I've got to play it.
Don't be suspicious. 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 Don't be suspicious.
John Ralphio?
God!
We sing that all the time on my channel. I say we, like I can hear other people singing to me. I sing it, and I picture them in my head singing along with me. But I love it.
I decided for this trial, like early on, I was like, you know what? There's so much that's there that I might as well just upload the video, have it ready.
Yeah.
And just go with it. So yeah, that is one that has, I don't know how many times I've played that clip throughout this trial, but it has been a lot. Absolutely love it. Elbort, thanks for the super chat. I wish they could just ask a jury on prosecution case rests. Well, the problem with that though is it runs the risk of if they are prejudiced against the defendant, you want to give them the chance to hear the defendant's case in chief. So, like that's the flip side. Like in this case, it feels overwhelming for the defendant, but you always want to make sure that the jury is making their conclusions at the point that they are supposed to be. So that's the only risk that runs with. The judge can say, well, the jury shouldn't even decide this because there's no way that the prosecution can win. That can happen. Rare, but it can happen. But to ask the jury themselves, that's a little bit too early for that, in my opinion. Amber Bell, thanks for the super chat. The jury doesn't have to unanimously agree on a single alternate theory or person. Just agree CW's case didn't overcome reasonable doubt. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
I wish more people understood that too. I wish more people understood that.
Yes. MZ, thanks for gifting 5 more Legalbytes memberships. So kind and generous of you. So Phoebe Mack, Carolyn Wisser, Carolyn Fraser, Hobbs, and Sue Magic. You've all been gifted memberships by MZ. So welcome back to Bite Club. So happy to have you here. Hope you can join us for our next members only live stream. Oh, look at that pup. Look at that sweet pup. I love it.
It's Lucy.
We are always fans of the animals on this channel. So I love it. Little cutie. Leah Baker, thanks so much for the super chat. Why not mention more about the vomit in O'Keefe's boxers? Head trauma causes convulsions. Did he sit himself up in the yard? That's another question too, is why wasn't there more vomit around in the yard too? Other people have asked that question also. There just are so many questions about that. And I didn't realize it was in his boxers. That was a detail that escaped me somehow. Yeah. But that's also another question, is like how would that have happened? It seems like that wouldn't have been likely if he immediately went unconscious.
Yeah.
So that and the blood drips that were down his front, presumably from his face, like that's gravity. That's him. That's him sitting up or standing up somehow while he has a bloody face. Yeah.
I said the same thing. Like even with it on his shoe, it to me that feels like I've seen that in, like I gave the example, like I got punched and as my nose bled, it bled on my shoes and like on my, shirt and everything. So I don't know how, based on their theory, how it ended up on those parts of his clothes either.
Yeah. Sanmer 85, thanks for the super chat. IIRC, if I remember correctly, emergency services said that they were told by Kay McLaughlin that KR said, I hit him. It was only her and Gemma Cave who say they heard this. Yes. And that's why there was the whole question of like, what are Katie McLaughlin's connections with the Albert family and all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, it was, those were the only two that said that they heard that.
Yeah. They said in the reports, in the testimony, then all of a sudden Flamati and, I think it was Nuttall, said that they heard it, but in the reports, it was Katie McLaughlin went to the ambulance and told them that. But now here it is, 2 years later, and now they remember hearing it. But that didn't come out until they're on the, on the stand. So when I put that in my podcast episode, I said, I don't think that they're lying. I know that they got a lot of crap for that. I don't think that they're lying. My personal opinion is if they didn't say that before and now they're saying that they heard it, she came and told them that in the ambulance. We know that for a fact because that was in the reports and they all, like that part's not doubted. I think that when you're in high stress situations, it's part of how memory works. If somebody tells you something, you can accept that memory as your own. So I don't think that they are lying. I think that they could potentially, and they also talked about how they've talked about this, at the station so much since then. So I think that it's a false memory. That's my personal opinion on that.
I tend to agree, actually. I think that they got mixed up with their memories, what they had heard, what they had, because that seemed to come out on cross-examination for me because, you had one of them who even thought that he saw a big, heavy winter coat.
Yeah.
Things like that just like didn't, it just seemed like they got mixed up on what the facts actually were, which is totally possible 2 years after an event, especially when they regularly respond to medical emergencies, probably in winter times as well. And so like there are all kinds of ways that, like we talked about before, memory is malleable. You can create memories based on what somebody told you about an experience that you had, or even just hearing about it, thinking about it. Every time you technically create a new memory of the experience when you think back on it. So yeah, I tend to agree. I don't think that they were like in on some kind of a conspiracy. I think those people just genuinely, at least for the most part, I think that they genuinely just didn't remember accurately what exactly happened.
Yeah, I agree.
Brian Stark, thanks for the super chat here. Ginny Trioli, how many jurors are looking at their own Apple Health info? That's another question. That's another question. I mean, they're not supposed to investigate. So how far can they go before it's an investigation? Mermaid Mary RN, thanks for the super chat. KR's DX of MS can cause her to deal, her diagnosis of MS can cause her to deal with extreme stress differently. Stress with MS can cause nonsensical, repetitive speech, flight of thoughts. Sure. The only problem with that is the jury hasn't heard that. So I'm wondering if the forensic pathologist has the ability to talk about that. I don't know, probably not. But that would have been interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
But it seems like the defense is their position is basically on like, it didn't even happen in the first place. So why would we try to go and explain it?
Yeah.
So Brian Stark, thanks for the super chat. The missing ring footage proves it for me. Yeah, that's an interesting point too. Experienced 1-0. Thanks for the super chat. Do you think that Proctor has made a deal with the DOJ and FBI, and that is why he testified instead of taking the fifth? I don't necessarily think so. There's nothing to suggest that he took a deal. He's kind of in between a rock and a hard place in terms of this particular case with him pleading the fifth versus testifying. Because if he pleads the fifth, that the jury is not supposed to consider that as like, evidence there of him, doing anything wrong. But because there's this expectation that he would testify because he's the lead investigator, that leaves a massive gap. And there's still questions as to like, well, why doesn't he testify? It would be natural for them to ask why isn't he testifying? even though they're not supposed to look into that as like, well, he pled the fifth, therefore guilty, therefore he did something wrong. So that's very much like a rock and a hard place for someone to be in that position. So, plea deal, I suppose possible, but I don't have any information to suggest that. Baz 80s, thanks for the super chat. Please poll on guilt, conspiracy, accident, innocent. So, okay. Well, let's see here. Okay, let me start a poll real quick. All right, so we'll do this. At this point in the trial, what do you think happened? No, that's a little bit too open-ended. I guess how do you lean regarding Karen's murder charge? How about that? That's basically the poll that we've been running this whole time.
Yeah.
Guilty, not guilty.
We've done that one too. Like, do you think that she's innocent? Do you think that she's not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt? Or do you think that she's like guilty on purpose? Or do you think that she's guilty on accident? That's the ones that we've been running. Those are the 4 choices we've been doing. It's interesting to see everybody's perspective.
Yeah. Too much reasonable doubt. Okay. Sorry for the airtime here, but okay.
Yeah, some people are saying they way overcharged. I think so too. And we had talked about why maybe they upped the charges, and I was thinking maybe because of, I don't know if it's because of the voicemails, which sounds like a stupid reason to do it, or if it's big, but the sensors on the car to show that she would have, where they're saying that she would have known he was there. But either way, the charging the second degree didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. It does seem like she was absolutely overcharged. So this is, I did a little bit different. I said, so we've got guilty, we've got not guilty framed, not guilty, too much reasonable doubt, or still need more information because we still haven't quite gotten to closing arguments yet. So, so that'll be interesting to look at when we get those results back. I love doing polls.
Me too.
Let's get some more questions here. Because I want to make sure that we get some questions that are also not super chats here. Let's see here. Mr. Baker, Lally made sure to confirm for all of us that someone was indeed driving the ambulance. Oh, that's true.
Who, if anyone, was driving the ambulance? Oh, gosh.
Robert Moline, Legalbytes, seemed as if the Commonwealth had the arrogance to assume that they could throw their experts up with the absolute knowledge that they were right. Yeah, I mean, it definitely, that's another possibility. I mean, that's another thing that I've thought about is, has the prosecution just not gone up against a very high quality defense team yet? And I don't say that to try to cast doubt or shadow on any other defense attorneys in that area that have come up against the likes of Lally. It makes me wonder, like, is this just that they've never come up against this level of a defense before and they just, were caught unprepared? On the other hand, they've been in pre-litigation with these attorneys for months and years now, I guess. And so, they should have figured they were going to have a really tough case here from the defense.
Yeah.
So,
and also, this is the death of a Boston cop. Like, how is this not every resource you have to make sure that everything is done properly, not only with the investigation, which still makes me, I can't even say it without rolling my eyes, not even with that, but with the prosecution as well. I was talking to somebody who's, her husband is a New York City police officer, and I talked to her about this a little bit, and she was like, when there's a death of a cop, it's like, that every single, I has to be dotted and T has to be crossed and every single thing, because you don't want to drop the ball at all when you're investigating the death of one of your own. Not that they don't do that with everybody else, but it's just like we've always heard this, that there's a lot of extra care and, into it when it's one of your own. And I don't know how it's not like that, not only with this investigation, but with the prosecution. It's just kind of like, we'll just throw some stuff out there and see what happens. That's how it feels.
Yeah. Yeah. Agreed. Let's get, here's one. Megan Rose question. Did Lally have all the info during opening statements and still make false claims to the jury? It seems so, right? All of these timestamps they had. And this is what makes me wonder if they just didn't do their due diligence with all of the details in the case. Or did they think that they could just pull a fast one over the jury? At this point, it's a coin flip for me as to which one that could be based on other stuff that I've seen. I already talked about the DUI lawyer, Google search by Karen Reed, supposedly that him trying to get that in, even though he wasn't expressly allowed to get that in. The Sally Port, that like all of that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's almost as if like Lally and the DA's office here is going to try to get away with whatever they can get away with. And I hate that. I hate that because, the DA, any kind of prosecutor, they're supposed to seek justice, not convictions.
Right.
Justice, not convictions. You're like trying to go for a conviction record or something like that. That should never be anywhere near the mind of any prosecuting attorney or attorney's office anywhere. It should be about, have we sought justice for this victim and for the community? Have we done right by the defendant in terms of their constitutional rights? Have we put on the best case that we possibly can? And there is a certain ethic to that has to be followed. And there's something about this whole case that reeks to me in terms of their ethics.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Yeah, I agree.
Here's another question here from, let's see, I'll take this from the, from the YouTube, excuse me for a second, the community tab here. We've got a question here from Divine Inhale with Donna Clifford 8112. What are Karen Reed's next steps, options after the trial? Can she sue the police for defamation in a civil suit? Do you think his parents will sue her in a civil suit? What are potential outcomes and repercussions of her being found innocent? Her next steps and her options after the trial. Can she sue for defamation? No, probably not, because the statements, or most of the statements anyway, are in the context of litigation. There is such a thing as litigation immunity from defamation. You can say the most outrageous things about another person, and if it's in the middle of a hearing, or in a court filing, it's defamation proof because you're doing that in that certain proceeding. And the reason for that is because there is a response that can come back that says you are full of crap, and here's why. That's different than being out in the public on social media or in the media and saying all kinds of things about someone. So defamation, probably not. However, I already mentioned earlier that probably a public disclosure of private information, there's potentially a claim there, talking about her medical history that should have remained private. That is highly, highly confidential information that was shared by Trooper Proctor with possibly other people that were even other troopers that are, working with him. If they're not working on that investigation, there's a question as to whether or not they have the ability to see that information. But definitely family members and friends never should have heard any of that information about her.
Yeah.
So things like that. Parents, can the family sue her? Yes, they can. There's a higher likelihood of them winning that because the burden is much lower for a civil case than it is for a criminal case. So even if she's acquitted here, that doesn't necessarily mean that she is going to be immunity proof from civil lawsuits afterwards. That's like the risk to her personally after all of this. We'll see what they think, though, having seen all of the evidence come out, because they may look at all of this evidence and say, I don't even know that we can meet preponderance of the evidence here because of this investigation. Like, it was that bungled that I don't think we can even proceed with that. So she may luck out with that. So I mean, otherwise other investigations could come out of it, into the Massachusetts State Police, into Canton PD. Who knows? Maybe not. Maybe there's not enough political will to do that. it's possible, but you hope that there will be repercussions for people that are doing the wrong thing. So, yeah. Anyhow, let's see. I think there are a few more super chats that we'll get, and then we'll probably close this out. We've been hanging out for a couple hours here. This has been so great having you on. I've got to have you back on sometime.
Yeah, I would love to. We should do it during verdict watch one day. We can do like a dual stream or something.
Yes, that would be great. That
be fun.
would absolutely be great. Let's see here. All right, San DB. I believe she's totally innocent because evidence doesn't support he was hit with a vehicle. I agree. Sanmer 85, based on cars, innocent because impossible. Seems that way too. Manny Fabani, you guys got Asget almost to 6K subs. Nice job. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I think she was at like 5.7 or something like that before. So that's awesome. That's great. KBF, attorney here. They didn't even comb through their evidence to make sure all the times lined up. Malpractice and incompetence at a minimum. Yeah, I think there's a good argument for that as well for Lally and the others. And here's one more question here from Tish. In retrospect, did we need every single witness we saw during the prosecution? And were it necessary to ask every witness about what happened at the bar, etc.? No, we did not need to hear from the Colakeithises as an example. I'm glad we did because they seem like wonderful people. Yeah. But like they were a breath of fresh air from all of the other people that just gave me the worst impression. But we didn't need their testimony. And we certainly didn't need to know about who was having, potato wedges versus pizza, or a Crystal Light with vodka, or what have you. Like, so much detail that did not need to come into this case.
Yeah, it was bogged down with all of the unnecessary stuff. But at the same time, it's like, part of that is what made the defense have so much momentum in the beginning, because these witnesses that are coming in, like the Colakeithis, are saying, they're a very loving, they were all lovey-dovey. My wife was, saying, why don't you act like this with me? And, oh, she's, so great, to the kids and does so much for them. And she throws, this big lavish birthday party. And so we're hearing all this and we're like, is this the prosecution's case that's happening right now? So I think, I think part of that kind of backfired on him. And I kept saying, like, well, maybe they're saving, like, they're getting all of this out of the way, hoping that the jury will forget it. And then they're going to bring in all like the hard hitting evidence. But then that never happened. So all the bombshells that I was thinking were going to be coming kind of fizzled out. And it wasn't, it was, we could have, instead of like this 72,848 witnesses that testified about the band at the waterfall, they could have, streamlined that a little bit. And, and I think that maybe would have potentially helped I won't say it would have helped their case. I think it would have hurt it less, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe hurt it less.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because the other thing is, when you have so many witnesses also, you also have potentially more opportunities for this testimony to not line up. Yeah. Those inconsistencies are going to get you in the end if there are too many of them, and if they are the wrong kind of inconsistencies, because you can have inconsistencies that don't really matter, right? Like you can say like, well, I don't know, like I thought somebody, turned around this way, but they turned around the other way, like, or it's something like that. That's just like irrelevant. Yeah. But like the kinds of inconsistencies, like, Brian Higgins' car was in front of Ryan Nagel's car. Brian Higgins' car was behind Ryan Nagel's car. Like it's those things matter. And when you have so many witnesses to compare everything, that is a problem for the prosecution, because that, like I said, that can all add up. So it was a problem to me that they had that many witnesses and with that many inconsistencies. One more here. Be rational and nice when in this global sandbox. KR, don't talk after verdict for book and money interview. And Broken Baker, thanks for the super chat. When, if ever, will we learn what the band played?
Sweet Caroline. They had to have played Sweet Caroline. They had to have. Yeah, I feel like that's on every band's playlist.
Yeah.
Ever. So I feel like they had to they had to have
And
played
especially
that.
in the Boston area, you know, that's what they play at Red Sox games too, right?
Oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so like it would have to be that would be a good like closing song, like get everybody out happy.
Yeah.
Future, thanks for the super chat. Let's get Brandy to 25K. Great stream, ladies. Are you
Oh,
how close
yay.
are you to 25K?
Let me look. Let's see. I'm at 24,284
Oh,
right
you
now.
were so close. You were so close. Yes, everybody who's watching, if you have not done so already, definitely go and check out Brandy Churchwell over at 13th Juror Podcast. Links are in the title and in the description below. Go and check out her stuff, watch her stuff, like her videos, subscribe to her channel. Let's get her to 25K. 100% we should. We absolutely should. Absolutely worth it. If you want all the details, all the charts, get everything organized in a way that Lally never could possibly do.
Yeah.
Brandy's the one to do it. So yes, everybody go over there and subscribe. Give all the love to Brandy over there for all of her great work on this case. Let me end this poll really quick. We are over 1,000 votes. All right. What did people say here? At this point in the trial, how do you lean regarding KR's murder charge? Not guilty, too much reasonable doubt was 48%. Not guilty, framed was 47%. Need more information, 2%. Guilty, 1%. So out of 1,000 people, that's guilty 1%. That's the lowest percentage point that I've had in my polling so far. It's been the lowest has been 3%. But maybe it's just because there are so many people here that are particularly interested in this conversation that tend to be more defense than prosecution leaning. But that's interesting stuff. I love getting that information.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. We are going to end the stream here. We'll have a quick outro and don't go anywhere afterwards, Brandy. I'll talk to you afterwards offline. But thank you so much to everybody for joining. Thank you to all the people that are new here from Brandy's channel. Welcome. I hope you can stick around for a bit and see more stuff on this channel too. And to everybody who is from my channel, like I said, definitely go and check out Brandy's channel. Thank you for also joining us for this. All the people that are joining in the chat, either engaging in the chat or commenting on the replay or just lurking and listening to our conversation. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks again to the mods as always for making sure that the conversation is good enough so that people can agree and disagree, but do so in a way that is, productive and all the good stuff. Super chats, memberships, all the people that are supporting the channel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And one more time, if you haven't done so already, one last call to like the stream before we head out. All right. Thank you guys. Thank you so much. And I will see you guys on Monday, tomorrow for day 30, next day of the defense's case in chief. We'll see where it goes. All right. See you guys. Thank you.